1 billion people. That is the number Marco Rubio, the United States Secretary of State, said out loud this week when describing the expected global audience for the UFC White House event. Not a million. Not 100 million. 1 billion. And he said it standing next to Dana White at the State Department, after both men signed a formal agreement on sports diplomacy, as if the idea of the most powerful government in the world co-signing a mixed martial arts event on the front lawn of the presidential residence was a completely normal thing that happens every day. It is not a normal thing. It has never happened before. And the scale of what is being built for this Sunday is only now starting to become clear to the people who have been following it from the beginning. Start there because the institutional weight of this event deserves acknowledgement before anything else. Dana White and the Secretary of State of the United States signed a contract together. They sat at a table at the State Department and formalized a partnership built on the idea that combat sports, specifically the UFC, is a meaningful tool of American soft power projection globally. White made the point that wherever the UFC goes, the fighters who look like the local population and represent that country at the elite level become rallying figures for entire nations. That the sport creates a specific kind of cultural attachment that transcends language and politics. Rubio heard that argument and responded by attaching the full institutional credibility of the State Department to it. Whether you find that inspiring or alarming probably says something about your relationship with both combat sports and American foreign policy. But the commercial and cultural implications of that partnership for the sport going forward are significant regardless of your political position. The billion-viewer number is the one that will define how this event is discussed historically. For context, and context matters enormously here, the most watched sporting events in the world, the FIFA World Cup final and the Olympics opening ceremony, consistently draw audiences in the range of 1 to 1.5 billion people globally. If Rubio's projection is accurate, the UFC White House event is competing on that level. Not in the same category as a regular pay-per-view. Not in the same category as a championship card. In the category of the most watched single sporting events on the planet. The gap between where the UFC was 10 years ago and where it apparently is on Sunday is one of the most remarkable institutional ascents in the history of professional sports, and it happened fast enough that most people have not fully processed what it means. Now move to the fight card itself, because the competitive picture has continued to develop this week in ways that deserve serious examination. Ilia Topuria sat down with Daniel Cormier and was asked directly whether he genuinely believes he can finish Justin Gaethje as quickly and as definitively as he has been predicting publicly. His answer was specific and conditional in a way that his public statements have not always been. He said, if Gaethje moves forward the way he has been saying he will be finished in the first 2 minutes. That is not an unconditional guarantee. It is a prediction with a specific trigger: Gaethje's aggression, Gaethje's forward pressure, Gaethje choosing violence over strategy. Topuria is essentially saying that Gaethje's identity as a fighter, the thing that has made him beloved, the thing that has produced some of the most memorable moments in the division's recent history, is the same thing that will get him finished early. And then he added the caveat that reveals how he actually thinks about the fight when the promotional filter comes off. He said if Gaethje runs, it might go to the second or third round. But that he will catch him eventually regardless. The finish is coming. The only variable is the timeline. Anthony Smith introduced a piece of information this week that nobody else had articulated clearly, and that changes the texture of this matchup in a meaningful way. He said Gaethje got under Topuria's skin. Specifically, and Smith was precise about this, when Gaethje made comments that touched on Topuria's personal life, on his ex-wife or his current relationship status, Topuria responded with a level of emotional investment that Smith has not seen him display before any previous fight. Smith's argument is not that emotional engagement makes Topuria a worse fighter. His argument is that it makes him a different fighter. That the version of Topuria who enters the octagon with something personal to prove is operating from a slightly different internal state than the version who enters purely as a calculating technician. And that difference, subtle as it may appear from the outside, can manifest in small ways that have large consequences inside a fight. He made the John Jones exception, which is worth noting. Jones is the one fighter in the sport's history who seems to perform better, not worse, when his personal life is in chaos. For everyone else, the principle holds. What happens outside the cage eventually appears inside it. Alexander Volkanovski offered the most nuanced competitive prediction of the week, and it is worth sitting with because Volkanovski has personal experience with Topuria that nobody else commenting on this fight has. He was finished by him. He has been in the cage with him. He knows what Topuria's pressure feels like in a way that is qualitatively different from watching film. His prediction was not that Gaethje has no chance. He was explicit that anyone who thinks this is going to be one-sided is misreading the matchup. He said Gaethje is defensively sound enough that he will not simply walk into the finish. That he will find his timing, create his moments, make Topuria work. But then Volkanovski identified the specific vulnerability that he believes will eventually be decisive. When Gaethje opens up, when he commits fully to the offensive exchanges that define his best moments, he creates the openings that Topuria needs. And Topuria, according to Volkanovski, is precise enough in those moments to make Gaethje pay immediately and finally. The champion stays champion. But not before Gaethje makes it genuinely difficult. There is a detail embedded in the Topuria interview this week that is easy to overlook but reveals something important about his psychological relationship with his own dominance. When a reporter pointed out that if he knocks out Gaethje, he will have knocked out all three of the UFC's most recent BMF champions, Holloway, Oliveira, and now Gaethje, Topuria's first response was to ask whether the BMF belt still exists. He did not know. Or he pretended not to know, which amounts to the same thing in terms of what it communicates. A man who is consciously aware of the symbolic significance of his own finishing streak does not ask whether the belt associated with it is still active. He either genuinely did not know, which suggests he has been focused on competitive preparation rather than legacy architecture, or he knew exactly and chose to perform indifference, which communicates something different but equally deliberate. Either way, the response tells you something about how he positions himself relative to the institutional mythology of the sport. He is not collecting symbols. He is collecting finishes. Anthony Smith also said something about the Topuria versus Islam Makhachev fight that deserves more attention than it received. He said he thinks it is a bad idea. Not because of Islam's skill set specifically, though he addressed that, but because of the size differential. He said he has seen both men in person. He said they are wildly different humans. That the physical difference between a natural featherweight moving to lightweight and a natural lightweight who is already large for the division is significant enough to change the competitive equation in ways that film and statistics do not fully capture. His recommendation was that Topuria wait, that there are other elite opponents at lightweight who represent serious challenges without the extreme size disadvantage that Islam brings to any matchup. This is the first credible voice in the conversation around that fight to frame the size issue as the primary obstacle rather than a secondary concern. Smith fought at both light heavyweight and heavyweight in his career. He understands what physical size means inside the cage in a way that analysts who have only watched from outside cannot fully appreciate. The McGregor USADA story continued to develop this week with additional reporting that clarified the sequence of events in ways that the initial New York Times piece left incomplete. The core facts are now established. McGregor broke his leg at UFC 264. He worked with Dr. Neil Elatrake, an orthopedic surgeon who has treated the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Rams, and some of the most elite athletes in professional sports. Elatrake recommended substances to accelerate the recovery. Those substances were prohibited under USADA's testing protocols. A therapeutic use exemption was requested through the formal process. USADA denied it, apparently concluding that the request represented an attempt to exploit the exemption system rather than a legitimate medical need. McGregor withdrew from the testing pool quietly, and the disagreement between the UFC and USADA over how that situation was handled became, according to this reporting, a significant factor in the UFC's eventual decision to end its relationship with the organization entirely. That final piece, the institutional consequence of a single athlete's medical situation, is the part of this story that has not received enough attention. The UFC's drug testing credibility was built on the USADA partnership. If that partnership ended in significant part because USADA would not accommodate the medical needs of the organization's most commercially valuable fighter, then the questions about what drug testing in the UFC actually means going forward are structural, not procedural. The Khamzat Chimaev and Dillon Danis confrontation at the RAF 10 promotional event this week produced the most entertaining moment of a week that was already full of them. These two were apparently placed in proximity to each other without sufficient logistical separation and exchanged words that escalated quickly toward the suggestion of a street fight. Chimaev was characteristically relaxed about the prospect. Danis agreed and then, in an interview afterward, described Chimaev as looking small in person. For context, and this context is not subtle, Khamzat Chimaev is a 240-pound professional fighter who has destroyed elite competition at welterweight and middleweight and who has one of the most physically imposing presences in the sport. Dylan Danis has not competed in MMA since 2019. The gap between those two facts and the confidence required to describe Chimaev as looking small in person is significant enough to be its own story. Chimaev, for his part, said he wants the belt in submission wrestling too. He is approaching the RAF event the way he approaches everything, as another domain to conquer, another belt to collect, another opponent to make look overmatched. The weather situation for the White House event deserves direct acknowledgement because it has moved from a theoretical concern to a concrete operational challenge. 3 days out from the event, it was already raining at the White House. The forecast for Sunday includes wind gusts of up to 28 miles per hour, a 55% chance of rain, and a 33% chance of thunderstorms during the event window. Dana White has said publicly that the event happens regardless of conditions, that they have 3 replacement canvases ready, that no weather scenario cancels Sunday night. Local forecasts suggest the rain may clear by 6 p.m. Eastern, which would give a 2-hour window before the broadcast begins at 8 p.m. But the margin is narrow and the stakes are enormous. 1 billion expected viewers, the Secretary of State, the White House lawn, and potentially a thunderstorm. The logistics of managing that scenario in real time while maintaining the broadcast quality and fighter safety standards that an event of this magnitude demands is a genuinely complicated operational challenge. Dana White has been doing this for 25 years. He has never done it quite like this. The financial dimension of this card came into sharper focus this week through a moment that Daniel Cormier probably did not intend to create. In a casual exchange with Alex Pereira about a bet on a soccer match, DC blurted out that Pereira is the only fighter on the White House card making over $10 million. Pereira did not confirm or deny it. He changed the subject, which, in the language of how elite athletes handle salary disclosure, is the most honest possible response. $10 million for a single fight appearance, at an event that is expected to draw 1 billion viewers, that has the Secretary of State's signature on a partnership agreement, that is being held on the front lawn of the White House on the nation's 250th birthday, is a number that makes sense when you put it in that context. Whether it is fair relative to what other fighters on the card are earning is a separate conversation that the sport has been having for decades and will continue to have regardless of how Sunday night ends. Here is where everything sits as of this week. The event is real. The scale is unprecedented. The fights are genuinely competitive in ways that the dominant narrative does not always acknowledge. The weather is a legitimate variable. The institutional partnerships are in place. The billion-viewer expectation is either the most ambitious projection in combat sports history or an accurate forecast of what happens when the sport's most powerful organization aligns itself with the most powerful government in the world for a single night of competition. Sunday answers all of it. And whatever happens on that lawn, rain, wind, knockouts, upsets, or exactly the outcomes everyone predicted, the conversation it produces will define the sport for years.